listening to Resilience with Ruti Shah, a podcast which brings you incredible stories of resilience, unfiltered, inspiring, and real. Stay tuned for today's guest. Today on our podcast, we have Azran Osman-Rani, CEO of Naluri, a digital health tech company making behavioral and psychological coaching more accessible and affordable. A Stanford alumnus, Azran was the founding CEO of AirAsia X, led iFlix Malaysia as CEO and Group COO, and shares his business building lessons in his book, 30 Days and 30 Years. A globally sought-after speaker, he's been one of London Speaker Bureau's most booked Asian speakers, known for his insights on disruptive innovation, corporate entrepreneurship, and agility. This conversation was originally featured on our sister channel, Shiny Happy People, as part of the Resilient Entrepreneur series. So we knew we had to bring it here too. Now let's dive into the conversation. Hi Azran, welcome to Resilience with Ruti Shah. It is such a pleasure to have you here today.
Hi Dhruti, thanks for having me.
Thank you. So Azran, you've had an amazing career with corporate and then you jumped into the world of entrepreneurship. What has that been like? What has your journey been like as an entrepreneur?
Well, if there was one word to summarize it, I'm going to pick pain.
Wow. Okay.
As much as it is incredibly exciting, and if I had to do it all over again, I would do it again in a heartbeat. But it is tough. But that's me. I love exploring, kind of new ideas, putting teams together, creating something from scratch. I've been doing that a few times now. But I think if there's one common denominator that shapes what might seem like ventures that spread across random industries, from building an airline from scratch, building an internet television business, and now in digital health, the common denominator across all of them, for me, what drives me is how do we look at existing industries and business models and find ways to make it much more affordable and accessible to the mass market segment in emerging markets. That's a common thread. That's what I'm incredibly passionate about. The other common thread across is that all of my co-founders have been industry experts, people who have deep domain knowledge in each of the industries. And my job is to partner with them to take advantage of that knowledge, but also to try to create something new together with them.
Right. So there is very clearly this deep sense of awareness of why you're doing what you're doing and how you want to go about it. I'm going to ask a very tactical question over here, right? Like one of the things that people usually go for is, you have to have the right founding team. You need to have the right co-founders. What was your overall approach when you go about hunting for those co-founders? How did that happen for you?
Sure. I'll start by saying, though, is that the most important question that founding team members have to answer, and especially to prospective investors, is why is this the right team to tackle this particular problem at this time, right? And so it's not just about whether you can define the right problem statement, but is this the right team and the best team to execute that? In some cases, I was co-opted into a co-founding team. For example, iFlix, Patrick Grove had the original vision. He brought Mark Britt from Australia, who had built internet TV, to come from Sydney to Kuala Lumpur. But he recognized that Mark didn't have that experience in Southeast Asia. And he, connected with me and said, "Hey, I want you to have breakfast with Mark. I think the two of you will hit it off well. You guys come from different perspectives." And so that was one example of me being brought into a situation. Whereas at Naluri, I had the original idea, and I knew very early on that I needed to do this with someone with the right healthcare experience. And I remember starting with one intern, trolling LinkedIn, reaching out to all of my industry contacts, 57 different meetings, and one of which led me to someone who introduced me to Dr. Jeremy Ting, my current co-founder at Naluri.
Yeah, great. And I could hear so many things over here. You're looking at synergies, right? Are we the right match in that sense? And of course, you have to meet them a few times before you really recognize that. You were looking at something like vulnerability, where it's okay, to get rejected, to reach out, to say that, hey, I need support over here. Who is willing to put their hands up and let's do this together? You of course are looking at resourcefulness, wherein you look at your LinkedIn network, you look at your personal network, the inner circle and the effect that comes with it. And of course, you were looking at being perseverant, not giving up. That's a huge number. You said 57, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm going to add one more thing. Because I've been in situations where founding team conflicts have been one of the reasons for failure, I went to Naluri thinking, you know what, as much as I'm really excited to build this venture with this guy, I think we've got a lot of common values and kind of vision for what we want to build, even though we came from different backgrounds, right? He came from that deep industry experience. I came from the venture building experience. But I also knew that in good times, you also have to think about, what if you had big conflicts? How are you going to resolve it? And you got to define that early on, not wait until there's a conflict and then figure out how you're going to trash it up.
Yes.
So, for example, I think we're probably one of the earliest founding teams who brought in an independent non-executive chairman that we both interviewed, selected, and we felt this is the right person who would be our go-to resource to arbitrate any conflicts between us as founders, but also as that industry stature to help us mediate between any potential conflicts with our investors. So predefining who do you go to help you resolve or arbitrate any disputes, and that both of you say, we both respect this person and will abide by whatever that person comes out, is so crucial, because you don't want to wait until there's already conflict to then realize you have no idea how to resolve it.
My God, that is such golden advice. And I've never heard of this before, to be honest, Azran. And I think that's true for your co-founders as well, right? It's the people you surround yourself with. You need to trust them. You need to respect them enough to say, hey, you're right, I'm wrong, and I'm going to go with you on this. And hence, this kind of a lack of ego, essentially, is what you would need as an entrepreneur as well. Unfortunately, what I've seen happen a lot is the ego gets built up as you keep growing, especially when you're in a fast growth mode. And it's the beginning of the end in some ways, if not all, right? So really appreciate that kind of a candor. Anything else that you've learned in this journey, which would really help budding entrepreneurs or entrepreneurs who are just starting up, things that you've done right that have worked out for you?
Well, I'm sure there have been a lot more things that have gone wrong. Maybe just one thing that I've done in Naluri that I've built on my experience at iFlix, because iFlix went very quickly from 5 guys sitting in a coffee shop at a shopping mall with an idea to 700 employees in 30 different locations in just 3 years. And when you start hiring a lot of people, and especially in their different locations, so this is before COVID, but effectively we were operating in a remote environment because we are in different geographies. People will come in from different work experiences, which means different work cultures. And so it was very important to define upfront how we get things done. We wrote down, these are the principles, how we're going to hire people. These are the principles, how we're going to communicate. What's the cadence of communications as a team? This is how we're going to do performance appraisals. This is how we're going to resolve conflict among leaders, and documenting that so that everyone who came in knew, like, this is how we're going to do things. And that also led to me writing my user guide to Azran. Right? Because if I'm going to bring people on board, right, you know what, it could take them 6 months before they learn my quirks and habits and, when I'm, when to avoid me and when to engage with me. But let's shortcut that process. Let me write down how I think, how I approach problems, how I deal with conflicts. What happens if I start to ignore you? What does that mean? Right? Into like like a 5-page document that just against shortcuts that process of coming together as a team. So I'm a big believer in writing things down, but I'm also a believer in what I call the Google Docs philosophy, meaning it's an editable document. I might write, this is how you work with me. But then you might tell me, Azran, you're either doing things differently from what you said you're writing, or I think there's a better way we can do this. Great, let's rewrite that, right? So it's a live working document, but it's always explicit.
Yep. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And so documentation, definitely. And that comes only if you are super clear about who you are, what you want to do, how you want to go about things. And of course, there is this built-in agility that comes with it, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm okay to flex and say that, all right, yeah, this is not how I responded or reacted to a situation. I'm going to add that right in.
Yes.
Brilliant. I love that. So, and the user guide to Azran, is that like a real document you've created?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Actually, I'd read that before I interviewed you. Anyways, so what are some of the challenges that you face? Because you did mention that, there is a lot of pain. It is tough to be an entrepreneur. And I'm sure you've had your times where you're like, oh my God, how am I going to solve for this? I have all the support. I've thought through things. I have done everything right by the book. I've written the book on this. How do I solve for this particular challenge? So, because that's what startups do to us, right? It's like you're having a good field day, and then suddenly there's a googly in the cricket terms, and you're like, okay, how am I going to tackle this? I have no idea. I prepared for something else. What kind of challenges did you face?
Oh, wow. Innumerable. From, for example, the airline, right? From achieving an IPO in 2013, and you think you're on top of the world, you validated the first long-haul, low-cost carrier to get to that public listed status, and everything came apart the very next year within months because of circumstances out of our control, right? March 2014, MH370, the plane that went missing, still missing today. Then July that year, MH17, the plane that was shot down over Ukraine, and then QZ8501, a fatal plane crash. And although none of the three were directly under me, the impact to our business was brutal. Imagine kind of 50% of demand from your two core markets effectively evaporating in a matter of months. How do you respond to that, right? Or how do you respond when suddenly the global financial crisis kicks in and the banks who had signed loan agreements pulled out, citing material adverse circumstance, and you're left high and dry, right? So many, even at iFlix, the original business plan of offering, a 30-day free trial followed by a conversion to a paid subscription, and hardly anybody wanted to convert to a paid subscription, right? And so the entire business plan premise collapsed in just 6 months after we launched, and we had to kind of reconstruct it. And Naluri, of course, COVID, right? COVID came in, and initially for 3 months, all of our clients disappeared because they had to prioritize kind of COVID protocols at work. And we had to completely rebuild the business.
Yeah. And I remember even when we were talking about you writing the foreword for the book, you'd mentioned these as the 3 black swan events, right? Things yes. you don't see them coming and they just do. And I think as an entrepreneur, that frequency is a little bit more prominent, and it's just that much more frequent as compared to as you being a CEO of an airline or of iFlix, right, for that matter. So how do you go about beating those odds? How do you go about facing those challenges? Like, not more in terms of what you did, but how did you set or train your brain and had the right mindset in order to tackle those challenges?
It was very interesting because the journey coming out of the COVID pandemic forced us to codify what does it mean to build resilience? What does it mean to help organizations bounce back from setbacks and failures and frustrations? And so my team and I came up with this framework for building resilience that we call the think model, THINK, to kind of force us to kind of reflect whenever we are confronted with these big situations. So very quickly, T for take control, being able to focus on the things that you have control and learning to let go or back off from the factors that are out of your control, which can sometimes be a lot more than the few things you can control. H is about hopeful outlook, learning to build optimism, right? To look at the glass half full. I is about taking informed actions, meaning specifically when things happen to us, how do we respond intentionally rather than react impulsively? Mm-hmm. But to be able to do that, you've got to be able to nurture yourself, to be able to strengthen your capacity to handle stress and pressure, but also to nurture your support network. And that for me has been probably the most important thing in my entrepreneurship journey, having that peer support group. And finally, K, to remind yourselves to know your goals. Yeah. Because without that, you could end up running around in circles. I'll be happy to elaborate in each of these 6 elements, but it was very important for us to really understand how do we proactively build resilience. Like anything, it's not going to come intuitively by itself if we're not proactive about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to prioritize your, the right mindset as an entrepreneur. You have to prioritize your mental health as an entrepreneur. I think it's super important because otherwise you're very quickly leading towards burnout. And sometimes we are not even aware of what the signs and symptoms of this burnout are. A lot of people prefer to go solo as entrepreneurs. They're like, no, I don't need a co-founder. I think I work better alone. And that's totally respectable. For them, I think it becomes even more important to be able to recognize the signs and to create that, what you said, your peer network, what I call the inner circle, right? Your group of supporters who are going to be there no matter what. And within that group, you can be as vulnerable as you need to be. Because I think eventually what we need to remember is we are all humans. And then we are entrepreneurs and CEOs and, our daily jobs, right? Along with all the other personal responsibilities that we have to, of course, fulfill. Azran, what I would love to understand is how did you personally, as an entrepreneur, apply Think as a framework during the challenges that you could have faced? If you can give an example of that.
Well, sure. In fact, I'm going to take it a slightly different part because it's very similar to how athletes get into the same problem. And part of it is because, my release is training to be an Ironman triathlon, right? And one of the common symptoms of an athlete, very similar to an entrepreneur, is we run the risk of overtraining, right? Because you think, oh, I'm not able to perform as well as I thought I should have. I need to train more. I need to train more. I need to do more. And you're piling on even more load on your body, and your body just can't take it. So you need to understand what are the signs that your body's breaking down and really take rest and recovery seriously. It's like a very important discipline in sports. You've got to be able to recover, allow your body to rebuild itself to be stronger the next time around. And there are microcycles. So for example, resting every 7th day, and then every 4th week, bringing down your training load by 20 to 30%. Every 4 months, bring it down by 50%. And every 1 month a year, like completely rest and letting your body just kind of recover. Same thing as business leaders. We think we need to do more and more because we have so much to do on our plate. What ends up happening is in a state when we're in that burnout state, it's going to take us 4 hours to do a task that we would be able to accomplish in just 1 hour if we're refreshed, both mind and body. So that's why the importance of, okay, you know what? It's taking me 4 hours to do this. This is nuts, right? Like I got to sleep on it. I got to catch up, take my weekend seriously, and I'm going to come back Monday being able to knock it out of the park.
Yeah. And coming to that point, where you said that how to recover right? Are there any techniques that you used in order to do just that? Like, how do you stop when you know that you're on a roll? It's so difficult to have that kind of discipline. I mean, I know that the mantra is have the discipline, have the focus, right? Yes, understandable. But really, how are you able to achieve that?
Sure. So I'm going to take the first 2 elements of that Think model, taking control and having a hopeful outlook. a big part of that actually, in a way, it's linked to the second end, nurturing your network. It's who is your sounding board?
Mhm.
Because when you say, well, I've got to be able to do this, who are you kind of bouncing that off for them to say, well, does that make sense or not, right? And that's why I'm a big believer in doing things with founding teams, because if you've got someone that you can say, I think I've got to be able to do this, right? And that person can say, well, is that the right task to do? Or if you're really worried, for example, even today, 2023 is a really hard year for many of us tech entrepreneurs because the funding climate has virtually dried up, right? So it might feel extremely overwhelming that I can't control that global inflation rates are high. The US dollar is at an all-time high, which makes it harder to raise money for us in emerging markets today. Well, I can't control that. But what maybe I can control is the number of investor meetings that I have to do, where before maybe it takes 10 investors that I meet before only one converts. In a tough market, maybe that's a 20-to-1 ratio. Yeah. So how do I go from 10 to 20? I don't know these people, but who are the people who might help me introduce me to new investors or different classes of investors? Today, VCs may be very conservative and just preferring to sit on the sidelines, but maybe there are strategic investors, certain corporates that are more interested to invest, but I don't know them. So how do I focus on the things that I can do and not worry about or be overwhelmed by the global macro environment, right? So that's kind of an example of T. Likewise, with H, hopeful outlook, right? Again, when you have that right, what I call mirrors, people who we trust that they will be able to tell us as is, right? Like really reflect the situation back to us. It helps forces us to somehow get out of sometimes a negativity doom loop, right? We always think of the worst case scenario, but by having to explain a situation to someone, number one, it helps to clarify the thought process in our head because I'm going to explain it to you. And when I see you respond to it, or I see that you might have dealt with a similar situation before, it might make me pause and think, okay, well, maybe I still have more things I can do and not feel frustrated and overwhelmed by the situation.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And thanks for taking us through that, because I think after that, you mentioned about informed actions, nurturing yourself and knowing your goals. Super important. Like typically people would start with know your goals, right? We already know them and we've already put them up on the whiteboard. Now it's time to kind of think back and say that, okay, so how am I going to be able to achieve this? Knowing very well that there will be obstacles, but praying from a place where I can influence situations, where I can take control of situations, rather than falling a victim to what's happening around me, and getting that into the despair mode, where I can literally, I'm just thinking and not taking action. So personally speaking, I have a big bias for action. So every time I feel like something is just so out of control that I can't really do anything about it, right? Act upon a small little thing. And I think that snowball effect, you will see it happen, right? Like personally, I've seen that happen where I started with something really small and you keep building on it. And hence I believe in this idea of perseverance a lot more, right? But being consistent as well in the efforts that you have. You approach those 20 investors, as you said, and you say, hey, but I didn't get the 20-to-1 ratio. We'll go for 30. It's going to be different for different people, right?
Exactly. Now, I'm going to talk about the I part, right? Informed actions. Here's a specific example about how to respond intentionally rather than react impulsively. In a tough environment right now, we are going to get rejected a lot, right? So from that 10 to 20 to even 30 or 29 rejections out of that 30, right? Normally, the reaction, the impulsive reaction is maybe one of two things. When someone is criticizing you, whether it's an investor or potential client that you're pitching to, you might either get defensive. You might argue back with them. Oh, no, you're wrong, right? You didn't understand this. Or the second reaction is one of, I'm useless. Oh my God, I'm a failure, right? But there's a third way to respond intentionally. When someone is rejecting us, we say, hey, can you tell me more?
Yeah.
And repeat back, right? So what you're telling me is, where I am today is not good enough for you. This. Can you help me understand it more, right?
Yeah.
Or if you're not ready to invest with me, would you mind potentially recommending me to someone else that you think would, consider us? You'll be surprised. I think at least 30 to 50% of investors, when you throw it back at them, they'll say, yeah, look, I think you're not a good fit for our fund or our firm right now, but maybe you should reach out to those 3 people. Now they're giving you leads. They are actually now a solution for you. And that's what it means to respond intentionally, even to rejections, rather than those 2 impulsive reactions.
Exactly. And it's amazing that you brought that up, because I have a similar example in the book where I talk about just this. Option 1 is to go crazy and say, oh my God, what am I going to do, to get into that spiral? I call it the negativity spiral, right? And the second, maybe, all right, let's go back to the whiteboard. We got this feedback. Let's change everything that we started, and stuff like that. But how about, what if it was just the way you presented that ticked that person off? And that's the example I gave in the book, that maybe it was just the way you presented to this particular VC that did not work out. And I think what a lot of people don't realize is that they get into this mindset that I have to approach a VC. There are angel investors, there are incubators, there are accelerators, there are corporates. I mean, there are tons of options. I think there are like 6 or 7 categories of investors that you can go for. And why are we limiting ourselves? Just because maybe my neighbor who is an entrepreneur did this, I need to do this as well. So I think even that false sense of comparison kicks in. So I think it's very important for entrepreneurs to understand that each situation is unique, right? You have your unique skill sets and you just kind of need to go with it. So I think that becomes really important in terms of even building your resilience from that point of view, right? Being very comfortable in your own skin and saying that this is the strength I bring on the table. And that's what I'm going to work with. Great, Azran. So tell me more in terms of what's moving forward, what's waiting for Azran and for Naluri.
Wow. So the other third factor, I talked about, wanting to solve problems that are about affordability and accessibility. The second part was about how do I find amazing people with deep industry experience. The third part that I'm absolutely passionate about is how do we scale businesses across multiple countries? It is really hard. And I'm a big believer in you've got to have local teams in each market who understand unique local dynamics. But then how do you run and coordinate a team in multiple locations where you're not all in the same place? And especially coming from a smaller market like Malaysia, unlike a large domestic market like Indonesia, Vietnam, our imperative is to expand and ensure that our addressable market is big. And so that means setting up teams in different countries, figuring out what parts do you localize and tailor, what parts do you harmonize and standardize. And so for us, we've launched in Singapore, we've launched in Indonesia, we've launched in Thailand. Hopefully Philippines and Vietnam would be next on our radar.
Yeah. So good luck with that as you go about in Southeast Asia. I think that's brilliant. And I'm hoping it will be only above and beyond from there, not just Southeast Asia. Any advice that you have for the entrepreneurs who are listening to this podcast?
So the second thing I want to touch on to close off is that second N, nurturing your network. Over the last 12 years, my bedrock has been my peer support group. 7 other business leaders. We meet about 7 or 8 times a year. It's always scheduled 4-hour blocks. They're all running businesses, but they're not in a competing business. And we have a standard set of protocols where we come in, we share our updates, our biggest challenges. And by listening to each other, we come to our own conclusion about what are the actions we want to take. Now, the next time you meet, you're going to report back on the actions that you decided. That creates accountability, and their perspective is also richer because they've got the longitudinal timeline perspective, seeing you over years. It's so much different than a one-off mentor conversation or one-off coaching conversation where you just get an input at one snapshot. But it's the regularity that I've got to meet a group it holds me accountable to the progress that I set for myself, but it's also my safe space as an entrepreneur where I can bring up the deepest and darkest issues that I'm facing, but I'm not being judged by my investors, my board, or my teammates or my employees.
Hey, great. And I think that's, again, one of those things which I've been thinking of for a long time, right? It's about creating a group. It could be a facilitated group, what I call the mastermind group, of people who come together and who set the goals, who support each other, and who hold each other accountable, and who take ownership of their actions, right? And the decisions that they make. Personally, I believe that it's tremendous value. I also believe that having a coach and mentor along that journey helps you as well. Simply because, again, that unbiased point of view, and they're trained to do that, especially as coaches, right? So I think that's
I also have executive coaches.
You do.
And the key part of executive coaching for me that works is because I see my coach every 3 months without fail.
Yeah.
But also for me, the peer support group, similarly, right? That whole ongoing, rather than one-off sessions. You know how somebody says, hey, can you mentor me? And I'm just going to have one coffee conversation with you, and it ends there.
Yeah. That I don't think that has the sustainable or the longevity effect that you need as an entrepreneur. I think we constantly need to be nurtured, your words, right? And in order to grow and keep moving in the direction that we've set for ourselves. So I think that's super, super, super important. Azran, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. And the one word that comes to mind as I think about our conversation is discipline in everything that you've done. And, there is a sense of purpose that I see that you're moving forward with. And I really wish you all the very best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For the book, and now having recorded the podcast with him, I think it was a whole different ball game. But I think one thing remained true is Azran's humility, and that's a trait not many leaders have. Ramana, this was part of our original Shiny Happy People podcast limited series. I think it was called the Entrepreneur Limited Series podcast, right?
Yes.
What are some of the thoughts that you had once you heard Azran talk about this?
Well, it was really refreshing to listen to him. I think I can listen to these conversations more than, multiple times, right? Because I realized that there's also different insights that kind of come to me each time I listen to the podcast. And it was lovely having him, Ruti. I think that was almost 2 years ago. I think for me, and that's something that stood out for me earlier as well, is the self-reflection, how it is crucial, right?
Yeah.
And not just as an entrepreneur, but also as a leader, or really anyone navigating challenges and growth, So that ability to pause, reassess, realign isn't just a skill, it's actually a necessity. And Azran also really kind of brings that through, Ruti. Ruti, would love to hear your thoughts. Like, what were the things that maybe kind of stood out for you this time?
I remember while having the conversation, I was really scribbling some notes as well, because we recorded this online, and what really stood out for me was the think model, and I'm just looking at my notes right now, and I hope I got this right, but I believe the T was for take control of what you can and let go of what you cannot. H was about having a hopeful outlook, because mindset really shapes how we handle the adversity that we face, right? I was about making informed decisions. It's about learning from our failures and experiences. And really, a lot of times we get so stuck up into the past and, we let it determine our future. But my thing is, where is the learning? Where is that, right? So making informed decisions by learning from our failures is such a powerful thing to do. N was for nurture yourself, because personal growth has a very direct impact on your professional success. I think people need to get over the mindset of, I can compartmentalize really well. We are one body, one mind, one soul. Compartmentalization works till a certain extent, but I think really nurturing yourself becomes so critical. And K was knowing your goals, because really having that clarity is what drives action. So, Azran, thank you so much for sharing with us the think model, because I think that's what determines how we keep moving forward. So, listeners, next time you're faced with uncertainty, take a moment to reflect. Am I thinking the right way? Because resilience is not just about enduring challenges, it's about growing through them. However painful it may seem in that moment, but really that's where true growth lies. All right, listeners, another episode. Well, this was a throwback one, but one of my personal favorites. And we'll be back with another episode of Resilience with Dhruti Shah. Stay tuned in. You never know. It could be another entrepreneur, leader, or a thought leader. And until we meet again, take care. Bye-bye.